It's not about the tools you have, it's about how you use them. The words hung in the frigid air, carried by the wind that howled through the dense forest. Jason Carter, 75 years old, looked out over the group of young faces staring at him, a quiet but intense calm in his blue eyes. His body, though worn by age, stood straight, every inch of him a testament to decades spent in the most unforgiving places on earth. He had been through worse than this. Much worse. The group of teenagers, barely half his age, fidgeted uneasily in the cold. They had been stranded in the woods for hours now, their radios dead, their GPS signals lost, and their sense of hope dwindling with each passing minute. The panic was palpable, but Jason didn't flinch. Instead, he turned his gaze towards the young man standing closest to him, his breath visible in the cold air. "What's your name?" Jason asked, his voice low and steady. "Luke," the kid muttered, his hands shaking as he tried to keep his composure. "How are you holding up, Luke?" Jason's voice was still calm, but it carried a weight that made Luke look up. The eyes of the group followed him, expecting some sort of reaction, some sort of guidance. But Jason just stood there, his face impassive. I don't know what to do," Luke confessed, his voice breaking slightly. "We're lost. We're gonna freeze out here." Jason nodded slowly. "I've been lost before. Many times. But freezing out here? That's not gonna happen." The group looked at him with skepticism, some more hopeful than others. Jason could see it in their eyes, the fear of the unknown, the uncertainty of the situation. But he knew this moment. He knew exactly how to handle it. "First things first," Jason continued, his voice steady. "Don't panic. The moment you lose control of your mind, you lose control of everything around you." He took a step forward, the snow crunching beneath his boots. "It's not about the gear or the situation. It's about your state of mind. If you let fear dictate your actions, you're already lost." The wind whipped around them, but Jason didn't flinch. "You think I was always this calm?" he asked, his gaze sweeping across the group. "Hell no. I've seen some things in my life, things that would make most people break. But I had to learn to breathe through it. And you're gonna learn to breathe through this." He knelt down and picked up a small, seemingly insignificant twig from the ground. This little thing could mean life or death. If you panic, you'll miss it." He straightened up, looking around the group. "You're not just surviving out here. You're learning how to stay alive, and that starts in your head." The group was silent for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. Luke nodded, then glanced at his friends. They were scared, but Jason's calm presence was slowly starting to work its magic. Slowly, they began to breathe a little easier. Jason's voice cut through the silence again. "This isn't the end. It's just another challenge. And you've got everything you need to face it. You just have to remember one thing, don't lose your head." The group, now a little steadier, began to move, following Jason's lead. They weren't out of the woods yet, but for the first time in hours, they had hope. And that was all they needed to survive. The group moved slowly, their feet crunching in the snow with each step. The cold had started to bite harder, the wind whipping around them like an invisible force. Luke glanced over at Jason, who was walking steadily ahead, seemingly unaffected by the bitter weather. His calm presence was the only thing keeping the group grounded. They had been walking for what felt like hours, though none of them were sure exactly how long it had been. The sun had disappeared behind thick clouds, and the world around them had turned into a white blur. The trees, once towering and imposing, now seemed to shrink into the endless sea of snow. Luke shivered, not from the cold, but from the uncertainty. His breath came in short bursts, fogging up the air in front of him. He had never been good in situations like this, but something about Jason's words kept him moving forward. He glanced at the others. Some were walking with their heads down, lost in their thoughts, while others exchanged nervous glances. None of them were speaking now. Jason had said it before, and it kept replaying in Luke's mind, "Don't panic. Don't lose your head." but the fear was still there, lurking just beneath the surface. Jason's voice broke through the silence. "Luke, come up here." The young man's heart skipped a beat. He had been expecting the old veteran to address him at some point. He moved quickly to catch up, his boots sinking deeper into the snow with each step. As he reached Jason's side, the older man looked at him with a steady gaze. "You're holding up well." "I'm proud of you," Jason said, his voice as calm as ever. Luke nodded, unsure of how to respond. "Thanks," he muttered, still feeling the weight of the situation pressing on him. Jason gave a slight smile. "You're more than capable. Just remember, this is as much a test of your mind as it is your body." They walked in silence for a while longer, but Luke couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The snow had begun to fall heavier, and the wind seemed to be picking up again. It wasn't long before he saw something moving ahead, a shadow among the trees. His heart raced, and for a moment, he forgot everything Jason had taught him. He was about to panic, to call out to the group, but then he heard Jason's calm voice again. "Stay steady. Let me handle this." Luke stopped dead in his tracks, his instinct screaming at him to run. Jason, however, moved forward with slow, deliberate steps, his eyes never leaving the shadow ahead. The rest of the group followed suit, though they were visibly tense. The shadow emerged from the trees, revealing a large figure covered in snow. Luke's pulse quickened. It was a moose, a massive, imposing creature. The animal paused, its eyes locking onto Jason's. For a brief moment, the two seemed to be in a silent standoff. Then, just as quickly, the moose turned and walked away, disappearing back into the forest. Jason didn't flinch. "Just another challenge," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Luke watched as the old man continued to walk, unfazed. His calmness was like a shield, and it made everything seem less intimidating. For the first time in hours, Luke felt like he could breathe again. They continued on, step by step, until the trees started to thin, revealing a clearing up ahead. Jason slowed his pace, glancing over his shoulder. "We're almost there," he said, his voice filled with quiet assurance. Luke nodded, the fear inside him slowly subsiding. With each passing moment, he was beginning to understand what Jason meant. It wasn't the danger they had to worry about. It was their ability to stay calm, to think clearly in the face of it. The rest of the group seemed to be catching on too, their steps becoming more confident as they followed Jason. Luke glanced around, taking in the beauty of the snow-covered landscape. It was harsh, unforgiving, but there was a certain peace in it, a quiet strength. And as they moved forward, one step at a time, he realized something. They weren't just surviving out here. They were learning to live in the moment, to embrace the challenge, and to find strength in each other. They weren't lost anymore. They were exactly where they needed to be. The clearing up ahead seemed to stretch on forever, the horizon blending into the endless blanket of snow. Jason led the group, his pace never quickening, his every step deliberate. The others followed behind, their breath visible in the cold air, their eyes fixed on the back of the old man who, despite the circumstances, seemed the most at peace of them all. Luke, now walking beside him, couldn't help but admire the calm confidence that radiated from Jason. He had seen the old veteran handle every challenge without so much as a second thought. The moose encounter had shaken some of the group, but Jason had simply moved forward as if it were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. For the first time, Luke felt a deep sense of respect for the man beside him. As they walked, the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that spoke volumes without saying a word. Jason seemed to sense Luke's curiosity, and without looking at him, he spoke. "You're wondering how I do it, who?" Luke blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected Jason to read his mind. "I mean, yeah, you never seem rattled." "It's like you're made of stone," Luke replied, his voice unsure. Jason smiled faintly, his eyes scanning the horizon. "It's not about being made of stone," he said, his voice steady. "It's about knowing what's important. You've got to clear your mind, focus on what's right in front of you. The rest is just noise." Luke nodded, taking in the words. He had never been good at staying calm, always letting his emotions dictate his actions. But here, in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but snow and the occasional tree, he felt like he could almost understand what Jason meant. It wasn't about ignoring the fear. It was about controlling it. As they continued, the group began to pick up their pace. The snow had started to lighten up, and the wind had died down, leaving behind a strange kind of stillness. Luke felt his muscles tense and relax in rhythm with his footsteps. There was something oddly peaceful about it, something that made him forget the hours of uncertainty they had just faced. Suddenly, one of the girls, a quiet teen named Emma, stumbled and fell. The others gasped, some instinctively reaching out, but Jason was already there, kneeling beside her. "You all right?" Jason asked, his voice as calm as ever. Emma nodded, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm fine," she said quickly, brushing the snow off her hands. Jason didn't say a word, but helped her up, making sure she was steady before letting her go. The group moved on, but Luke noticed something. Emma had straightened up, her shoulders no longer slumped. She wasn't as nervous anymore. Jason's simple action, the way he approached each moment with the same steady hand, was starting to have an effect on everyone. They weren't just following him physically. They were beginning to follow his example in spirit. They reached the edge of the clearing, and in the distance, they could see the faint outline of a cabin. Luke's heart skipped a beat. They were close. The thought of warmth, shelter, and safety made him quicken his pace, but Jason's voice stopped him. "Slow down," he said gently. "We're almost there. But don't let your guard down. Stay focused. It's not over yet." Luke slowed his steps, reminding himself that Jason was right. They were still in the wilderness, and their journey wasn't finished until they were back where they belonged. The group, though tired and worn, had learned something that day. They had learned that surviving wasn't just about physical strength. It was about mental strength, about staying calm and grounded in the face of adversity. With each step they took, they were not only getting closer to safety, but they were becoming stronger in ways they never imagined. Jason kept walking, his figure steady and unwavering, the group following in his wake. Luke, now more certain than ever, kept his eyes on the horizon. He wasn't just walking anymore. He was learning how to survive. The cabin grew closer with each step, its outline becoming sharper against the white of the snow. The group was moving more fluidly now, the tension from earlier slowly fading as their destination came into view. Luke felt a surge of hope rise within him, but Jason's voice reminded him to stay grounded. "Don't get too excited," Jason said, glancing over his shoulder. "We're not there yet." The words hung in the cold air, a steady reminder of the lessons that had been drilled into them all day. Luke nodded, swallowing back the excitement that had begun to build. He glanced around at the others. Some were moving faster, eager to reach shelter, while others were still struggling to keep pace. It wasn't the snow or the cold that had slowed them, it was the weight of their fatigue. The day had been long, and the mental exhaustion was beginning to show. But Jason? He showed no signs of slowing down. His pace remained steady, his eyes always scanning their surroundings, looking for anything that might be out of place. Luke realized that the old veteran was more than just a guide. He was a constant, a rock that kept the group together and focused, even when the world around them seemed like it could fall apart at any moment. As they neared the cabin, Jason gave a small nod, signaling them to approach with caution. "Stay close," he murmured. "We don't know who might be inside." The group tightened their formation, following Jason's lead. They reached the door, and Jason gently tested the handle. It was locked. Without a word, he motioned for the others to step back. Using the skills Luke hadn't realized the veteran still possessed, Jason picked the lock with ease. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a dimly lit interior. The warmth from inside hit them immediately, a stark contrast to the cold they had been enduring outside. Jason held up a hand, signaling the group to wait. His eyes scanned the room, taking in every detail. "It's clear," he said quietly. "Come on in." One by one, they filed inside, their bodies immediately reacting to the warmth. Luke felt a weight lift off his shoulders, but there was no time to relax just yet. Jason was already checking the room, looking for anything that might pose a danger. "Stay alert," he said as he moved to the window, peering outside. "This isn't over. We've got shelter, but we still have to stay smart." The group settled around a small stove in the corner of the room. Jason began unpacking the supplies he had been carrying, distributing them among the group. Luke watched as he worked, impressed by the efficiency with which Jason moved. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. Everything had a purpose. As the group huddled together, eating the meager rations they had left, Luke found himself reflecting on the day's events. He had learned so much in such a short time. It wasn't just about surviving the elements. It was about staying calm, thinking clearly, and trusting in the skills that had been developed through experience. He had seen Jason do it all day, stay calm in the face of fear, assess the situation, and act with certainty. It was a skill he was beginning to understand, and one he knew would stay with him long after they made it back to safety. As the warmth of the cabin wrapped around him, Luke allowed himself a moment of peace. The storm outside was still raging, but inside, he was safe. And in that moment, he realized that it wasn't just about surviving the storm. It was about how you handled it, and how you helped others do the same. Jason had taught him that much. And for the first time in a long while, Luke felt like he had a purpose. He wasn't just a scared kid anymore. He was someone who could face the storm, no matter how fierce it might be. The warmth of the cabin was a welcome relief after the brutal cold of the wilderness, but the group couldn't afford to let their guard down just yet. They had found shelter, but the storm outside was far from over, and Jason wasn't the type to assume safety until they were back in civilization. The wind howled against the walls of the small cabin, rattling the windows and sending occasional gusts of snow into the corners of the room. Jason stood by the window, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the horizon through the crack in the curtains. The others were huddled around the stove, trying to make the most of their meager supplies. Jason had taught them to conserve what little they had, a lesson that Luke was slowly beginning to internalize. It wasn't just about surviving the storm, it was about how to endure. Luke sat near the stove, his hands cupped around a small tin mug of hot tea, trying to warm up from the inside out. The others were quieter now, their energy spent from the day's journey and the emotional toll of the storm. As much as the warmth was comforting, Luke found his mind wandering back to the wilderness they had just left behind. "We're not out of the woods yet," Jason said suddenly, breaking the silence. The group turned their attention to him, all of them leaning forward slightly, as if waiting for some new instruction. Jason's voice was steady, unwavering. "The storm's still here. We've got shelter, but we're not staying here for long. We need to be ready to move at a moment's notice." He walked over to the table, his eyes sharp as he examined the supplies. The rest of the group, though weary, nodded in understanding. They had come to trust Jason's judgment, his ability to assess a situation and take action without hesitation. "We'll sleep in shifts," Jason continued, his voice low but firm. "The weather outside is unpredictable, and we can't risk being caught off guard. We'll keep the fire going, but don't waste fuel. And remember, the most dangerous thing out there isn't the cold, it's the complacency that comes with being warm and safe. Don't forget where we are." Luke sat up straighter, the weight of Jason's words sinking in. The cabin, for all its warmth and comfort, was still a temporary refuge. They had made it this far, but the hardest part of their journey was still ahead. Jason moved to the small stack of firewood in the corner, picking up a log and adding it to the stove. He didn't say much more after that, but the group knew what to do. Luke took a deep breath, feeling the quiet strength of the room settle over him. The uncertainty of the past hours was still there, lurking in the back of his mind, but he found a sense of clarity in Jason's leadership. The older man wasn't afraid to speak the truth, even when it was uncomfortable, and that was what made him so reliable. As the night wore on, Luke found himself drifting in and out of sleep, his dreams interrupted by the sounds of the wind and the crackling of the fire. He woke briefly to check the others, Sarah, Emma, and the rest of the group, each of them taking their turn by the stove, ensuring the fire didn't die. The rhythm of the night, quiet and uneventful, brought a strange sense of calm. But it was a calm that didn't fool Luke. He knew that when the morning came, they would have to leave the shelter they had found and continue their trek through the wilderness. The storm would eventually pass, but the lessons they had learned, the things they had been taught by Jason, would stay with them. They weren't just surviving. They were learning how to endure. And for the first time since they had set out, Luke believed they had a real chance at making it out of this storm alive. The morning light finally broke through the storm's veil, casting a soft, pale glow on the cabin's walls. The wind had died down, but the snow continued to fall in light, steady flurries. Luke woke slowly, the warmth from the stove and the exhaustion from the previous day making it hard to leave his makeshift bed. He could hear the soft sounds of breathing around him, the others still sleeping in the corners of the cabin. Jason, however, was already up, his figure silhouetted against the light coming from the window. He was standing still, looking outside, his stance as calm as ever. Luke pushed himself up, his muscles stiff from the cold and the long night. He grabbed his coat and moved quietly over to where Jason stood. "We're leaving soon, who?" Luke asked, his voice still thick with sleep. Jason didn't turn to face him, but nodded slowly. "We'll wait for the storm to pass completely," he said, his voice steady as always. "But we can't stay here. It's too exposed. We'll move out as soon as we can see where we're going." Luke nodded, taking in Jason's words. He had learned by now that there was no room for complacency. Jason never took unnecessary risks, and he didn't allow anyone else to either. The group had been safe inside the cabin, but that safety was fleeting. Jason was always thinking ahead, always aware of the next move. Luke glanced out the window, where the snow still blanketed the landscape, making everything look still and untouched. It was hard to imagine that just a few hours ago, they had been struggling against the storm, unsure of what would happen next. But now, with the storm subsiding, the group had a sense of clarity. They had made it through the worst, and that had given them a sense of strength they hadn't had before. As the morning passed, the group began to stir. Sarah was the first to wake, followed by Emma and the others. They gathered around the stove, warming their hands and silently eating the small rations they had left. No one spoke much, but there was an unspoken understanding between them. They had all been through something, and they knew it wasn't over yet. After a while, Jason moved away from the window, his movements fluid and purposeful. He began organizing the group, dividing up their supplies and checking their gear. The others followed his lead, without hesitation. There was no question of what needed to be done. They had learned that by now. "We'll head east," Jason said, looking over at Luke. "We'll make it to the trailhead by midday, if we keep moving. From there, we can get to a road." Luke nodded, his heart quickening. They were finally making progress. The end of the wilderness was in sight, and they had made it through. As the group packed up and prepared to leave the cabin, Jason gave a final check on the fire, making sure it was properly extinguished. "All right," he said, turning to the group. "Stay focused, stay together. We've come this far. Don't let up now." They stepped outside, the cold air hitting them like a shock. The storm had passed, but the cold remained, biting at their faces and hands. The snow underfoot crunched as they moved, their steps in sync, the group moving as one. Luke felt a new sense of strength, not just from the warmth of the cabin, but from the lessons he had learned from Jason. It wasn't just about surviving the storm. It was about facing it head-on and coming out the other side stronger. The wilderness was still wild, still unpredictable, but with each step, they were mastering it. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were learning how to thrive, no matter what came next. The sun was starting to break through the clouds as the group trekked through the snow-covered forest. The storm had passed, but the air remained cold and biting, each breath visible in the sharp light of early morning. Luke kept his eyes on the ground, focusing on his steps as he trudged through the deep snow, but his mind kept drifting back to the lessons Jason had taught them. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about how to survive, how to keep your head when everything around you seemed determined to make you lose it. They moved quietly, each person lost in their thoughts, the rhythm of their footsteps the only sound besides the occasional snap of a branch in the wind. Jason led the way, as always, his movements deliberate and precise. Luke admired the way the old man handled everything, as if he knew exactly what was coming, even though the wilderness had a way of throwing unexpected challenges their way. The path they were on had started to widen, leading them toward a small ridge that overlooked a valley. Jason paused for a moment, scanning the area ahead. "We're getting close," he said, breaking the silence. "Just over this ridge, we should be able to see the road." The group nodded, the knowledge that they were nearing safety giving them a new burst of energy. Luke felt the weight of the journey lifting as they reached the crest of the ridge. For the first time in days, he saw something that wasn't just snow and trees. In the distance, he could make out the faint outline of a road, a sign of civilization. His heart skipped a beat. They were almost there. But even as the thought crossed his mind, Jason's voice cut through his excitement. "Stay focused," he said, his voice steady and calm. "We're not there yet. We need to keep moving." The others followed Jason's lead, their pace quickening but still cautious. They knew that the road was close, but the wilderness wasn't something that let you relax until you were well beyond its grasp. As they continued down the ridge, the snow beneath them grew softer, and the trees began to thin out, revealing more of the open space that led toward the road. Luke's eyes stayed focused ahead, his thoughts steady, the lessons from Jason playing in his mind. It wasn't just about reaching the destination. It was about how they got there, how they had handled every obstacle, every moment of doubt and fear along the way. They were stronger now, more resilient. They had learned how to survive, but more importantly, they had learned how to endure. The road grew clearer, and the group began to feel the first real warmth of the day as the sun finally broke free from the clouds. It wasn't enough to melt the snow, but it was enough to signal that the storm was truly over. Jason stopped again, his eyes scanning the area. "We're almost there," he said, his voice quieter now, but no less firm. "One last push." The group nodded, their determination solidifying. They had made it this far. There was no turning back now. Luke felt his feet move more quickly, his steps more confident. With every step, they were getting closer to the road, closer to safety. But it wasn't just the physical distance that had changed. They had grown over the course of this journey. They had learned what it meant to trust, to listen, to stay calm in the face of fear. They had learned what it meant to survive, not just as individuals, but as a team. As they reached the final stretch toward the road, Luke glanced at the others. They were all tired, but they were no longer the same people they had been when they started. They had been tested in ways they hadn't expected, and they had come out stronger for it. Finally, they reached the road, the solid, familiar surface beneath their feet, a stark contrast to the endless snow and trees that had surrounded them. They stopped for a moment, letting the reality sink in. They had made it. They weren't just survivors. They were a team. And they had conquered the wilderness together. The road stretched ahead of them, the familiar asphalt offering a sense of comfort they hadn't felt in days. The sun, now fully out, was beginning to melt the edges of the snow, signaling that the storm had finally passed. Jason led the way, his steps steady and measured, as always. The group moved behind him, slower now, but with a palpable sense of relief. They had made it. The wilderness, with all its harshness, was behind them. Luke felt the weight of the journey lifting from his shoulders. They were no longer fighting against the elements. They were on solid ground, with the road ahead marking the end of their struggle. But as they continued, Jason's voice broke through the silence. "Don't get too comfortable yet," he said, not looking back. "We're still not out of the woods." The group stopped, their relief quickly replaced by a renewed sense of focus. They weren't home yet. Luke felt a shift inside him. The physical exhaustion was still there, but now it was the mental fatigue that lingered. They had been through a lot, and it wasn't just the weather that had tested them. It was their ability to stay calm, to keep moving, even when everything seemed impossible. "How much farther?" Sarah asked, her voice tired but steady. Jason glanced back at her, his expression unreadable. "Not far," he replied. "But we still need to keep our wits about us." They continued walking, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the snow-covered ground. As they moved, Luke thought about everything that had happened. The fear, the uncertainty, the moments when they had all doubted whether they would make it. But through it all, Jason had remained the same, calm, unshakable, and always one step ahead. It wasn't just the survival skills that had gotten them through this. It was Jason's ability to lead, to keep them grounded when the world around them seemed to be falling apart. Luke looked at the others, their faces tired but resolute. They had all learned something over the past few days. They had learned how to survive, but more importantly, they had learned how to face fear without letting it control them. They weren't the same people they had been when they first set out on this journey. They had grown stronger, more capable. And as they neared the edge of the road, the first signs of civilization coming into view, Luke realized that this experience would stay with him forever. It wasn't just about reaching the end. It was about how they had gotten there, about what they had become along the way. They were no longer just a group of strangers thrown together by circumstance. They were a team, united by their shared experience, each of them having learned something from the others. They reached the edge of the road, where the trees began to thin and the landscape opened up. Ahead, the faint outline of a truck could be seen parked by the side of the road. Jason stopped and turned to face the group. "We made it," he said, his voice low but filled with a quiet pride. Luke felt the tension in his shoulders ease, but he knew better than to let his guard down completely. There was still the journey back to the town, and no matter how close they were to safety, Jason's lessons would stick with him. Stay focused. Stay calm. Never let fear take control. They walked toward the truck, the end of their journey finally in sight. But as they approached, Luke looked back one last time at the path they had traveled, the snow-covered wilderness now behind them. It was a place that had tested them all, but it was also a place that had shaped them. They had learned to survive, and they had learned something even more important. They had learned to endure. The truck sat quietly at the side of the road, a beacon of safety in the midst of the wilderness. It was an old vehicle, its paint faded by time and weather, but it was exactly what they needed. The group approached it slowly, their bodies tired but their spirits high. Jason was the first to reach the truck, his pace steady as ever, but there was something different in his movements now. The weight of the journey had not lifted from his shoulders, but there was a subtle shift, a quiet satisfaction in knowing they had made it through. As the others gathered around, Luke took a deep breath, the cool air filling his lungs with the fresh scent of the outside world. He could feel the relief settling in, but he also knew this wasn't the end. They still had a long way to go before they were truly safe. Jason opened the door to the truck and turned to face the group. "We've done it," he said, his voice calm and steady, as if this had been the plan all along. "But this isn't the end. We still have a lot to do." Luke nodded, understanding exactly what Jason meant. The road ahead might have been the key to their safety, but it was only the first step. They weren't home yet. Still, there was a sense of peace that came with knowing the wilderness was behind them. For the first time in what felt like forever, they could think about the future, about what came next. The journey had changed them all, and Luke realized how much he had grown. He had faced fear head-on, learned to stay calm in the face of uncertainty, and had come out the other side stronger. "So, what now?" Sarah asked, her voice breaking the silence. Jason glanced at the group, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Now, we take a breath. Then we get in the truck and head back. But we do it together." They all nodded, understanding the weight of those words. They had made it through as a team, and that bond was something they would carry with them no matter what happened next. The truck's engine roared to life as Jason started it up, the sound echoing in the stillness of the forest. The group climbed into the vehicle, the cabin warm and comforting after days spent braving the cold. As the truck moved forward, Luke glanced out the window, taking in the landscape one last time. The The trees, the snow, the mountains in the distance, it had all been a test. A test of endurance, of patience, and of trust. And they had passed it. They were no longer just a group of strangers thrown together by chance. They were a team that had faced the wilderness and come out victorious. The road stretched out before them, a path leading to safety, but also a path that marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. As they drove toward the horizon, Luke felt a sense of peace settle over him. The storm was behind them, and the lessons they had learned would stay with them forever. They had survived the wilderness, and now they were ready for whatever came next.